Hey, Warrior Saints, good morning. Christ is risen. Welcome to Wednesday's episode of our Crucifixional live stream. Glad to have you beautiful people in with us today. It is glorious here in Arizona. It's in the mid-90s expected today, which is always nice for us because it's drier, so it's not quite as hot. It's not as good as the 80s for sure, but we love it. Invite you guys to join us anytime you want to visit the Valley of the Sun. We've been talking about 1 Corinthians. And we're going to continue. Yesterday we finished in chapter 1 with the gospel of the cross, the word of the cross, meaning that what looks foolish in the world's eyes, i.e. the crucified Christ, is actually the power of God for salvation for all of those who are believing. And it then rolls right into, in this beautiful text of, to conclude chapter 1, verse 26, where Paul is talking to those of apostolic ministry, that which would be the progenitors of ministry, of the priesthood, and of your ministry. And he says the following: "For consider your call, brethren. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth." So he's recognizing that the community he's talking to, that he's teaching to, the Corinthians, which really can also translate to myself and to you, is like, you weren't powerful and famous and rich and wealthy and all. You weren't like the creme de la creme of society, right? You were called, but not because you were like Superman or Superwoman. But God chose what is foolish in the world. Not foolish. Foolish in the world. Again, those that are smaller, maybe in the world's eyes. This is what God is looking at. Does that make sense? So let me clarify. This is not to say that God chose stupid people. That's not the point at all. It could be it's probably quite the opposite. But the statement is, when the world perceives you as in a certain light, that might be, in a certain light that is negative or lesser, smaller. That's what God's looking for. Does that make sense? God chose what was foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what was weak to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are. Powerful. Like, it's to say, and it's to give us confidence to recognize, not that we're great, but that, like, you may be feeling like you don't amount to much. You may be feeling like you don't have a lot to offer, or that your life is just kind of a mess. I mean, for all of us probably feel that for sure. And that there's a certain chaos, and like, I'm just not good enough, and I'm not going to be special. I'm not special. I'm not the Apostle Paul. I'm not the Apostle Peter. I'm just, this train wreck of a person. And what good am I? And what St. Paul is telling you is that you are a vessel of God. You are a tool, an instrument that he wants to use to share his gospel with the world. And the reason that this is done, now this is the good part of it, the reason that this is done, or that God chooses to do so in this manner, God chose what is nothing to bring to nothing things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. What he's saying is, look at it like this. You may feel like you are nothing. And that's precisely the point. Is that so that as God is using you to share his message, you cannot boast and say, look what I did. It's the power of God's message in spite of you. Does that make sense? So, like, let me make it very simple. Father Chris, I can never boast to say, look at what I've done. I'm so great. Look at the Warrior Saints. Look at this parish here. It's so great. Because of my efforts. Yeah, I work hard. But it's not because of me that God's message grows. It's in spite of me that God's message grows. And so he uses a real jerk, a real loser, if you will, in life, a real, someone who carries his own baggage, so that we can't say, look at me. So that any good that comes may be through me, but it is because its origin is in God. God does the business, and he uses a broken tool to do it so that you can say, God really does great in spite of his tools. Does that make sense? Let's say it like this. If I was building a house with a hammer whose handle broke, right? Well, if I'm able to build that house, it shows what a great builder I am. Even though my tool doesn't work right, even though my tool's busted, I build a beautiful house, it's because I'm a great builder. It's the same thing with God's message. Even though he uses tools that are broken, hammers without handles, right? It's because he's a master. He is the master, right? Because the message, the gospel of the cross, that's what works. Does that make sense? So the idea here is, that it's God who does the work. This is a very quick aside. I'm going to end with this because I'm going to go like full on anti-women clergy. It's really funny, like in the feminist movements, they always say, well, why can't women be priests? And, in some denominations, women are priests. In the Orthodox Church, they are not. And it is not because we think men are better than women. There are a multitude of reasons, one of which is because the priesthood today is the heirs of the apostles. So in other words, Christ chose 12 men to be his apostles, and the priesthood inherits that responsibility. Now you're reading about the apostolic ministry, and what Paul is telling you is that Jesus chose the bottom of the barrel to be his priest so that the priest can't boast. Look at me. It's like, no, it's God's message in spite of you, right? So when feminist-minded people are like fighting hard to say, well, it's got to be equal. Like, yeah, you want to be equal? You're asking to be the bottom of the barrel, right? Like you're trying to build up your ego. I'm a woman. I'm good. I'm worthy. And the whole point of this message is that it's destroying the ego. So like clearly they don't understand scripture in the first place. It just always cracks me up when we read that. All of that rambling to say, consider your call, right? Men or women. Now leaving that kind of silly stuff aside, consider your call. You have been called to be a warrior saint. Like in spite of how low you may feel, in spite of how chaotic you may think your life is, in spite of what little you think you may have to offer, you have been called by God to be a warrior saint and let his message come through you. And even though you may feel like you can't do it and you feel like, whatever you may have with you, the depression, the anger, the frustration, the sadness, the loss, the grief, the physical sickness, the mental sickness, the spiritual, whatever you may be carrying, all of that as prohibitive, in spite of that, God can work through you and wants to work through you. And you have to allow yourself to be in that position to be his vessel, his tool. Even though you may be a great hammer or a hammer that has no handle, it doesn't matter. Allow God to use you by becoming a warrior saint, to use you in the sense of sharing his message and his love and his victory through you. To do that, we need a little bit of help. We all do, all of us. And those of us at the Warrior Saints movement are trying really hard. We're working our tails off to go through the fire ourselves so that we might also share with you the things that we learn, so that as we all are being used as tools and instruments of God's grace and God's mercy and love, that we can share that with you and help you on your journey. We're giving you 100%, 101% really of everything we've got to do that. Visit us at warriorsaints.org. And there you can do a couple of things. It's becoming like a university, warriorsaints.org. And one of the things that you can do to learn is by getting our book. It just came out a few months ago. You can find that at book. So it's its own subpage right there. You can get the book. And in the book, you learn how to live a crucifixional life. The second part, or second course, if you will, is to subscribe to the Way of the Warrior Saint. This is an online library that's just loaded with teachings about specific things to help us become better men and women, to become warrior saints, so that we might be vessels and tools that God uses. The last one is our Becoming Men series. And in this Becoming Men series, it's a specific program, a specific course dedicated to the 13 to 19-year-old youngins, young fellas that are trying to become men. This is it's a fun program that we hope that they go through that with their fathers or some male role model, mentor, teacher, pastor, something to that effect, so that they might transition from male to men, to become men. We love you, beautiful people. We will be back again tomorrow, Thursday, for our Crucifixional live stream at 11 a.m. As always, we appreciate you ringing the bells, liking, sharing, all of that good stuff. Visit warriorsaints.org and warriorsaints.org/book to make sure you start your university studies. And until tomorrow, as always, keep walking on the way of the Warrior Saint.